welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciate it. A lovely email from Victoria from Dram. Seemed quite happy with the review, so everybody's happy, which is cool. As I always like that. Always good to keep everybody happy, and anyway. On to this week's episode of the show. Again, carrying on the theme of samples that came my way in December, I'm looking at the new releases from Holyrood Distillery in Edinburgh. So a big thank you to Giancarlo for the samples for today's episode of the show. As you probably may well recall, Giancarlo kindly came to the shop in sort of early December with the samples, and we had a sort of like, for want of a better word, not sounding too grandiose, this sort of the first tasting in England. Actually, I think it was the first tasting outside of Edinburgh, I think, of the new Noir range that they had just released. So it's nice to meet Giancarlo. It's always nice to sort of meet reps because you can communicate via email. You never get to sort of see him. You occasionally talk over the phone, and it turns out sort of like Giancarlo is Welsh. Used to work for Penderyn, and obviously is Italian with a name like Giancarlo. Bit of symbiosis here, not that I'm Welsh or Italian, but as a lot of you are probably aware of, my mother was born in Wales to Italian parents, so I feel a little bit of it. This is why I have a symbiosis with Wales to a certain extent, and I guess it's just one of those things in the DNA, I guess, a bit like sort of rain and sheep is in the DNA of Wales, I believe. But anyway, so yeah, quite peculiar to have a rep for a Scottish distillery that sort of lives in Wales. But anyway, yeah, that's the global nature of whiskey these days, isn't it? Anyway, I'm not going to waffle too much, because as you can see, I've got the 3 samples of the new Noir range, but I've also got 3 new make samples as well, which I always love doing new make, and their cask strength, or well, not really cask strength, still strength, I suppose, is probably a better word. So I'm not going to waffle too much, as I've done an episode of the show not so long ago, I think it was earlier last year, on the distillery. So let's just take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so I always love tasting new make, and as you know, this is the thing with Holyrood, is that they are doing all manner of different new makes. Does make it a bit difficult, I suppose. I mean, we were having this conversation in the shop, and the distillery are thinking about doing a kind of a core bottling, I suppose. But the trouble is, when you make so many different types of new make, nobody really knows what your kind of distillery style is going to be. So, anyway, I guess we'll cross that bridge when we eventually get to it. But anyway, the new make bottles, little sample 10cl bottles, I still think some of them are available. So anyway, we're going to kick off with the Heritage Malt new make at 60% ABV. Oof. Yeah, nothing like starting with a nice light one, is it? So 90% Golden Promise and 10% peated malt. The yeast they use is Pinnacle MG Plus and Tropical WLPs 077. Oh, that's a great name for you, isn't it? And that was distilled in 2024. The second new make sample we're looking at is the Holyrood X Pilot White Stout Recipe New Make Spirit. Try saying that after you've had a few. So again, 60%. This is apparently comprised of 51% East Lothian malt, 27.9% light Munich, 2% light Crystal, 3.5% Dexterin malt, 3.9% Cara malt, 3.9% Biscuit malt, and 7.8% HDP. Another great sounding name for a malt. Anyway, so yeah, and that was, I believe, distilled in 2024 as well. Last of the 3 is the Holyrood Brewers Series Chocolate Malt, again 60% ABV, 90% pot still distiller's malt and 10% chocolate malt, using distiller's yeast M strain and Edinburgh ale yeast. So that's the 3 new makes. Then we're going to move on to the 3 bottlings in the new Noir range. This is called, they're calling it, so first bottling is the Premier Cru yeast, 47.2%. It is 60% Pinnacle M and 40% Morvarini PDM malt, yeast, sorry. Malts, yeast, all these weird names, anacronyms, and anyway. So yeah, so they've called this Premier Cru yeast. And I'm assuming, I don't know whether sort of like this Morvarin PDM yeast is one that's used in Burgundy. I don't honestly know. Didn't ask the question, but it's been matured in 48% ex-bourbon casks, which have then been finished in ex-Chardonnay casks, and then 52% ex-bourbon casks, which have been finished in ex-white wine casks. Number 2, let me just check, that is definitely the Burgundy yeast. So again, 60% Pinnacle M and 40% Morvarini B, 100% ex-bourbon cask matured, which has been finished in Burgundy barriques. And the final bottling is what they're calling the Bordeaux yeast, 47.1%. Again, 60% Pinnacle M, but this time 40% BP725. Sounds like a type of petrol to me, but there you go. It's a strain of yeast apparently. And again, 100% ex-bourbon, but this time finished in Bordeaux barriques. So yeah, I think this is going to be really interesting. I'm bloody alcoholic, so I'm going to probably need a lie down after this. So let's kick off with a bit of heritage new make. Right, so let's start with the heritage new make. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Right, so it's got some quite pungent off the still notes. No surprise there, but it's kind of, it's not sort of overly sort of off the still. It's got a nice oiliness, lots of sweet barley, dry barley. There's a little bit of yeast, apricot, lemon, touch of tropical pineapple, peach, bit of salt. That's a lovely new make, it has to be said. And I think this is the thing. I mean, you know, I've tasted several of their new makes before, and they've all been absolutely gorgeous. But it makes you wonder what the hell they're going to do with all this different new make. And I suppose this is the point. I mean, I tasted sort of like, obviously they're called what they were releasing, you know, the sort of Emperor and Amber and all that kind of stuff, and that they're all now finished. Now we're on to Noir, which is completely different. Then there'll be another release, probably sort of later on in the year. And like I said, it's kind of, I love the experimental nature of what Holyrood are doing, but you know, there ain't no sort of signature unless they're sort of now distilling, you know, a signature kind of style. I don't honestly know, but anyway, let's see what Pablo on this. Again, quite estery, pineapple, pear, peach, sweet barley, drinkable. I mean, there's a little bit of an off the still oiliness there, but not really much in the way of faintiness. Actually, for 60%, I mean, yeah, it's got a little bit of a burn there, but it's got a lovely length. I mean, you know, just stick that into American oak, and I think you'll have a lovely whiskey. And that's the whole point. It's all about the heritage malt. So you don't really want to sort of play around with too much wood and sort of like mask that, do you? Really. Right, so more oiliness, more off the still now, less of the fruit. So it's now, once you cut it with a little bit of water, it then kind of, to a certain extent, shows up its real character, if you like. And it certainly needs some oak. It's a little bit drier. It's a little bit of a coffee note. I mean, it's still a lovely new make, but I think obviously it needs a little bit of oak. It needs something just to underpin all of that. it still has that lovely barley character. I get sort of sweet barley, I'm getting dry barley husks, lovely purity. It's not quite in the sort of mega barley sort of heritage style of, say, the Ardnamurchan, but give that a little bit of oak, and I think that's going to be an absolute terrific whisky. So yeah, nice start. So let's move on to the Pilot White Stout recipe new make. Let's see what the nose gives us on the scent. Well, that's kind of interesting. Really malty, but it's not dark chocolatey malt. It's got a white chocolate character, which is just kind of like, whoa, you know, where's that coming from? Well, it's obviously coming from the yeast, isn't it? Honestly, and the malt, and no, it's not coming from the fucking yeast. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Pilot White Stout recipe new make. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Well, as you would expect from all the varieties of malt that are used in this, it has a real maltiness. White chocolate, unsweetened honeycomb, caramel, shortbread, so the caramel is coming through with that caramel character. The biscuit malt is obviously adding the biscuitiness. There is a kind of, like I said, a beeriness there, but it's not a sort of a dark stout. It is a white chocolatey kind of stout, which is kind of quite unusual. There's a little bit of porridge, there's some fragrant, almost apricot-y kind of notes. Again, a lovely new make. What would I do with this? Difficult one. Possibly a port finish might work with that, give it some portiness. But again, maybe the best thing is just 100% American oak and let all the different malt types come through. It's got a lovely complexity as it is, so it doesn't really need a lot of messing with, it has to be said. Let's sort of pass on. Malty, herbal, slightly darker on the palate. I'm getting a little bit more sort of cacao bean and light chocolate, not so much white chocolate. It's got some earthiness, again some biscuity notes, a little bit of apricot, quite chewy, and again really doesn't feel like 60%. Well, you can feel it a little bit. I mean, it's not masking. You would expect literally a 60% ABV spirit to pretty much have no finish whatsoever, but it has got quite a good length. Yeah, and I think sort of coming back to sort of what casks I would age it in, just whack it into bourbon. Nose hasn't really changed putting any water with it. It's still quite sort of malty, white chocolate, still got that sort of biscuits and shortbread and cereal. I mean, again, it is really quite complex, and just goes to show you, you know, that sort of you don't have to just stick to the bog standard malts at all. You know, you can play around with sort of brewers and distillers malts and create something remarkably different. Let's see what the palate's on. Not quite so dark now, still really malty, lighter, a little sweeter, but there's also a little bit more dryness from the barley coming through. Add a little bit of vanilla. I'm getting less of the sort of complexity now. I've watered it down a little bit. There's only a little bit of the sort of caramelly kind of character coming through. I don't really get too much biscuitiness now. It's more kind of like sort of dry barley and what have you. But like I say, American oak, I think that's the way to go with that. Again, add some vanilla. You can probably use a little bit of judicious first fill American oak as well, just to add a little bit of vanilla. Maybe a bit of sort of toasted oak or something like that, you know. But don't go crazy with it, you know. Just allow the sort of like the malts to kind of come through. That's what I would do. So on to the final new make. This is the chocolate malt. So in actual fact, only 10% chocolate malt and 90% pot still distiller's malt. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Well, that 10% chocolate malt really punches above its weight, it has to be said. It's a good, honest, bready, malty, almost kind of somewhere almost in the sort of Ben Nevis-y kind of thing, but not kind of as bready as Ben Nevis. If you can imagine Ben Nevis slightly more chocolatey and malty, maybe, then this is probably what you're going to get. Now this I think would work with a port cask. This I think has got the cojones. You could either use sherry or port or something like that. Just to kind of like, you know, bolster that sort of bready, malty, rich chocolatiness. Yeah, like that. That's nice. That would work with some cask influence. So anyway, let's pass on. Again, a very beery kind of palate. It's got a lot of chocolate going on, cacao bean, milk chocolate, a little bit of cereal. It's fairly straightforward. It doesn't have the kind of complexity of the previous two, and thus I think it probably would take a different type of cask quite nicely. Like I said, port, sherry possibly. They, I think, would work really nicely with that because they would add another layer of complexity to that. In saying that, it is a little bit more noticeable, the ABV on that. It is a little more masked, but again, really intriguing new make. Let's see what the nose is like now. Still cereally, still chocolatey. It's brought out some quite nice citric notes now. And I still keep thinking that a port finish or a port cask, you know, maybe bourbon and then port finish possibly would work really nicely with this, or maybe a vatting of the two. Yeah, let's see what pass on. Bit short now. Again, really quite simplistic. It's bitter in quite a bit, which is quite a surprise because ordinarily the bitterness in a whiskey does tend to originate with the wood. So I'm quite surprised I'm getting that kind of bitterness there. But it's kind of like a bitter sort of chocolate kind of note again. So maybe that's the, well, it can only be the chocolate malt really doing that. So there's nothing else there really. And so yeah, again, I think that new make is kind of tailored, or ideally going to be sort of used with some kind of stronger oak, whether it's like I say port or sherry or something like that. So yeah, really intriguing. Right, okay, so let's move on to the first of the three Holyrood Noir bottlings. This is the Premier Cru yeast. There's a lot of cask going on here, and I like it. It's a lovely nose. Let's be positive to start off with. It's got a lot of rich Chardonnay character, sort of like apple, pastry, wine, a little bit of honey, white peach, pear. Quite sweet, quite robust, quite full. The alcohol is 47.2, and it's right. It kind of like just sort of like stops that sweetness becoming too much. Now, the negatives are the name. When you call something yeast, you expect the sort of like, you know, you're talking about the yeast, and as we know, you know, Holyrood are playing around with different barley types and different yeasts and things like that. But this is very cask orientated. I'm getting a lot of Chardonnay character. I'm getting white wine, and maybe they just sort of just not used the yeast name at all. They should just call it Premier Cru, because you are expecting more kind of characteristics from the yeast, and I'm not getting that. I'm getting character from the oak. Not, and like I say, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the kind of like the name is a little misleading, shall we say. Sure, pass one. That's got a real toastiness. I'm getting them. It's just Burgundy. It just shouts white Burgundy on the finish. That toasty American oak. Lots of spice, cinnamon, apricot, apple, Chardonnay apple. Big, mouthful and juicy. I mean, and that is really impressive. I mean, that's seriously impressive whiskey, it has to be said. But like I said, they really should have just dropped the yeast name. They should have just called it Premier Cru, because it's very cask orientated. Not to the detriment of the barley. I think the balance is pretty good, even though it is slightly heavily skewed towards the oak. But it's just the name, I think, that's a little bit misleading. But aside from that, bloody good whiskey. So let's move on to the Burgundy yeast. So let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Robust, savoury, red fruits, digestive biscuits, a little bit of spice, touch of barley, touch of sour red fruit. Again, I'm in Burgundy, I can see this, but it's kind of, alright, yeah, maybe, but again, it's kind of like this is all oak character. You know, the Burgundy Barrica's adding the sort of red fruits and what have you. It's again, like I said, the name is slightly misleading. I mean, if it was, I would like to have tasted the new make of this to sort of see how much influence the, one assumes, Burgundy yeast had on the new make, because I can see where they're getting at. It's kind of like, you know, we want to emphasise the Burgundy character, so we use Burgundy yeast and we use Burgundy barrels. But if they had just called it, you know, Holyrood Burgundy, we'd have been all happy. We'd have been sort of, you know, I'm being picky here, I guess, at the end of the day. But it's a lovely whiskey. Don't get me wrong. Let's see what pass that. That's a lovely mouthful. I mean, just ignoring the name and everything else, juicy, ripe, red cherry fruits, slightly red, a little bit of red jam, shortbread, or no, not shortbread, digestive, yeah, digestive biscuit and raspberry jam. It's but it's balanced as well. I'm getting some barley notes, some citric notes. The alcohol is kind of offsetting the sweetness. Again, lovely whiskey, really like that. But again, it's the yeast terminology. I would expect more. It's more cask, so you probably should have just called it sort of, you know, Burgundy cask, because the influence, I think, or certainly from the tasting, seems to come more from the cask than the actual yeast. I could well be wrong. I could be talking out of my you-know-what, but to me, that's how it comes across. But still, bloody good whiskey. Really like that. Okay, on to the final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the Bordeaux yeast, 47.3. Let's see what the news gives on this end. Sweeter berries, little more winey, sort of aromatic, maybe sort of more black fruits, which would be fitting with Bordeaux, sort of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's a sort of toasty oak, a little bit of sort of Cabernet spices, marzipan. Big, chunky. It doesn't quite have the sort of the savouriness of the Burgundy. It's kind of more kind of upright and sort of, you know, that kind of thing. It's kind of like, it's got a lovely citric note as well. It's again, it's balanced. It's a lovely whiskey. I really like this because there is a touch of barley kind of coming through. I would say there's a bit of distillery character, but that would be sort of, well, you know. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Juicy, full, quite dry. It's definitely got that Cabernet black fruit character. A little bit of spice, quite a bit of tannin, and the alcohol sort of is almost emphasising that tannin, so it's a little on the short side. It doesn't need water, but it's actually making my mouth water quite considerably. It has a lovely juiciness to it, and again, like I said, it's very cask orientated, and probably they should, with this, just sort of called it, you know, Holyrood Burgundy, Bordeaux rather. But it's a lovely whiskey at the end of the day, and I really like that. And you know, I think the balance is definitely there, and that's the whole point. You know, I want a bit of balance with my whiskey. I don't want it to be sort of too one-dimensional, and I think that has some lovely balance. I think all three of them actually has some lovely balance. Yeah. So let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Giancarlo for the samples for today's episode of the show. Really intriguing. I love tasting new make spirit. I mean, and I urge you as whiskey sort of lovers to sort of, if you can, get hold of the new make spirit, because, like I said, it's, well, normally it's the DNA of a distillery, but in this instance it's the DNA of the distillery having a bit of a play around, and they are just, it's just amazing to me how much influence the yeast has. And I think this is obviously an area of whiskey making that's been long sort of overlooked, and is now, I mean, everybody's sort of like done the casks, they've done the heritage barley and all the different barley types and organic and all this kind of stuff, and now we're getting distillers that are going, well, hang on, we've got 1,000,001 different types of yeast strain that we can play around with. What if? And here we have it, you know. And the heritage obviously is more kind of a barley focused kind of new make, but really intriguing, and I really like that. The white stout was just, well, I mean, you know, whoever put this combination of malts together was just kind of like, oh, that's genius work, it has to be said. And I mean, I hope that appears as a bottling at some time in the near future, because that was like really good. And I hope it just appears in American oak and not dressed up with anything else, because I really like the fact that all these different malts shine through and create something really quite complex. And like I said, the sort of like the chocolate malt, I mean, yeah, that's kind of almost tailor-made for a sherry or a port finish or something like that. And, you know, again, I love what they're doing. I think this is just sort of like from a geeky point of view, and I love that kind of stuff. You know, it's really intriguing, and you know, this is if I owned a distillery, this is probably some of the sort of things that I would want my distiller to play around with. The Noir range, yeah, okay. I mean, forgetting the name, and I think I've gone on and on about that when I was tasting them. Lovely whiskies, really nice, balanced, and intriguing and different, and you know that, and I think that's kind of like sums a distillery up. And like I said, the Premier Cru yeast, like I said, forget the yeast terminology. Just think of it as Premier Cru, sort of like, you know, lots and lots of Chardonnay character, but again, sort of balanced and not too over the top. The Burgundy yeast, I kind of, probably my favourite of the three, I think. I love the savoury angle of it. I'm a sucker for Pinot Noir anyway, it has to be said. Give me a lovely Burgundy any day of the week. And that just kind of said Burgundy to me in spades. And to a certain extent, I can say the same about the Bordeaux. It certainly said Bordeaux to me. It said that sort of upright Cabernet Sauvignon kind of black fruit kind of character. So all three of those bottlings succeeded, and were very indicative, I guess, of the casks they'd been sort of matured in, and just really nice. So anyway, if you haven't I know, like I said, we did the sort of the UK release, if you like, if I'm bigging myself up here, in the shop, and there was a number of you guys that did come along and taste them, and some of you bought them, which was really nice. But if you didn't, one of these may well appear in this month's or this week's, this Wednesday's in actual fact, whisky tasting evening. So if you haven't bought a ticket for it, I think there are tickets still available, and you like the sound of these kind of the Holyrood Noir bottlings, then get a ticket, because there's still probably some available, and you'll get the opportunity to try one. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you've enjoyed it. I thought it was a great deal of fun. I'm going to go off and lay down in a minute. Oh no, I can't do that because I've got to edit the video, haven't I? Anyway, when I've edited the video, I will go and have a lay down, I think. Anyway, I've got to finish these off. Anyway, until next week, I'll stop waffling now. Good afternoon and good dramming.